The alarm started small, just a soft beeping in the medical wing of the Galactic Council station. Dr. Teo was in his laboratory when he first heard about it. He was studying samples of crystalline life forms, trying to understand how their thought patterns worked. His assistant, a young Zathani named Sana, came running into the room with worry written across her pale blue face. "Doctor, something is happening in the residential sectors," Sana said, her voice shaking slightly. "The medical team is requesting all available scientists." Teo put down his tools and looked at Sana. She was one of the smartest beings he had ever worked with, and he had never seen her afraid before. He stood up and followed her without asking more questions. They moved quickly through the bright corridors of the station, passing other workers who seemed confused about what was going on. The station was home to 17 different species. Humans were the newest addition to the Galactic Council, having joined only 15 years ago. Most of the alien species had been traveling through space for thousands of years. They had built amazing technology and developed complex societies. Humans were still learning how to live among them. When Teo reached the medical wing, he saw something that made his heart beat faster. In the main observation room, there were patients from different species lying still on medical beds. A Velthari insect being with a hard brown shell was completely unresponsive. A Zathani telepath was lying frozen, her eyes open but seeing nothing. Even a crystalline Orenthian was there, its glowing structure dim and weak. Dr. Hayna, the chief medical officer, looked up when Teo entered. She was human too, one of the few who worked in the highest positions on the station. Her face was tired and stressed. "Teo, thank goodness you are here," she said. "We have 17 patients in this condition, all from different species. All became sick within the last 4 hours, but we cannot find any virus, any bacteria, any infection at all." Teo moved closer to the nearest patient, a Velthari named Kree. He had known Kree for 3 years. She was brilliant and kind. Now she lay completely still, her breathing shallow. Her dark eyes were open but empty. "What are her symptoms?" Teo asked. "She stopped responding to anything about 2 hours ago," Hayna explained. "She was moving and talking before that, but she kept repeating the same words. She kept saying, 'I remember, I remember, I remember,' over and over again. Then she just stopped talking, stopped moving, stopped everything. It is like her mind is locked, somewhere we cannot reach." Teo felt cold inside. This was not normal. In all his years of medical work, he had never seen anything like this. He looked at the other patients. Some showed the same empty stare. Others were twitching, their bodies moving in strange patterns, while their minds seemed completely gone. Over the next few hours, more patients arrived, then more, then more. By nighttime, there were over 200 beings in the medical facility. Doctors from all the different species worked together trying to figure out what was causing this. They ran tests, took samples, used machines that could look inside the body and the brain. But nothing showed any signs of infection. Haina called for an emergency meeting with the council leaders. Teo attended the meeting along with Sana and other senior scientists. In the large chamber where the 17 species usually discussed peace and trade, there was now only fear and confusion. The representative from the Orenthian species stood up, his crystalline form reflecting the light in nervous patterns. "This looks like an attack," he said, his voice sharp and angry. "Which of you has created this weapon?" The Zathani leader, a tall figure with long silver hair, stood next to him. "We have done nothing. Perhaps you created this to weaken our people." The arguments began. Species turned against each other, suspecting that one of them had created some kind of weapon. The council that had kept peace for thousands of years was breaking apart in just a few hours. Teo's sister, Jiwoo, worked in the diplomatic section. She came to find him after the meeting ended in anger and accusations. Jiwoo was smaller than Teo. with kind eyes that usually sparkled with hope. Now she looked scared. "The station is falling apart," she told him. "Everyone thinks someone else did this on purpose. Soon there will be fighting. We need answers, brother. We need to know what this is." Over the next 2 days, things got worse. More and more beings started showing the same symptoms. They would stop moving, stop talking, stop responding to the world around them. Some would get stuck repeating words. Others would scream silently, their mouths open, but no sound coming out. The medical facilities became so full that they had to open new areas just to hold all the sick. Teo and Haina worked without sleep, trying everything they could think of. They brought in Kree's people to examine her, since Velthari technology was very different from human technology. They asked the Zethani to use their telepathic gifts to try to reach the minds of the affected beings. Nothing worked. The sick remained locked away in their own minds, unreachable and unresponsive. By the 3rd day, fear had spread like fire across the station. Species that had lived together peacefully for years now kept to themselves, armed and suspicious. Some ships left the station, afraid that whatever was causing this might reach them too. The docking bays became places of chaos and pushing crowds. Teo stood in the medical laboratory late one night, looking at test results that still showed nothing. His eyes felt heavy, and his mind felt foggy from no sleep. Haina sat at another desk, holding her head in her hands. She looked at him with eyes full of hopelessness. "I have never seen anything like this," she whispered, "and I fear it is only going to get worse." She was right. The next morning, the first death occurred. A Velthari named Tor, who had been sick since the beginning, simply stopped breathing. His body was healthy, but his mind had locked so tight that it forgot how to keep his body alive. When the news spread, panic became complete. Beings from all species rushed to leave the station. Security forces had to stop them from breaking things and pushing each other aside. The beautiful station that had represented hope for all the galaxy's peoples was becoming a place of death and terror. That night, when Teo finally left the medical facility to rest for a few hours, he felt the weight of everything pressing down on him. He walked through the empty corridors, hearing only his footsteps. The station that was usually full of life and color and noise was now silent and gray. He did not know that the worst was still coming. He did not know that before this was all over, he would become the most important being in the entire galaxy. He did not know that his human body held the key to everything, simply because it was flawed in just the right way. For now, he only knew fear, exhaustion, and the terrible feeling that nobody knew how to stop what was happening. The collapse of the Galactic Council station had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. The breakthrough came on the 7th day of the epidemic. By then, more than half the station's population was sick. The medical facilities had stopped trying to heal people and were only focused on keeping them alive. Bodies lay in rows. Machines breathed for lungs that had forgotten how to work. Feeds went into mouths that could no longer swallow. It started with a simple observation that Sana made. She was studying the neural patterns of the sick beings, trying to understand what was happening inside their brains. She noticed something that seemed impossible. The sick beings were not losing their consciousness. Instead, they were becoming too conscious. Their brain activity was higher than normal, much higher. But it was also strange. It was moving in patterns, repeating the same paths again and again, like a record playing the same song over and over. Sana brought her findings to Teo and Haina. They looked at the data together, sitting in Teo's office while the station shook with the sounds of alarms and the cries of desperate beings. "Look at this pattern," Sana said, pointing at the glowing screen. "It is almost like memory recall, but not normal memory recall. This is something much more intense. It is like the brain is stuck in a loop, remembering something over and over and over again. Teo leaned forward. His mind was exhausted, but something about what Sana said made sense. He had been thinking about memories, too, wondering if the illness had something to do with how different species stored and processed memories. "Can you show me the differences between species?" Teo asked. "Show me how a Velthari brain pattern is different from a Zethani brain pattern, and how they are both different from a human brain pattern." Sana worked quickly, pulling up images of neural activity from different beings. The Velthari had a very organized hierarchical pattern. Information moved through clear pathways, layer by layer, logical and perfect. The Zethani had something different entirely. Their consciousness was spread out in a web-like network, connected to other minds telepathically, creating a kind of shared space. Then Sana showed a human brain. Teo looked at his own neural patterns, recorded during routine medical checkups. His brain was messy. His memories were not organized in neat lines or perfect networks. They were scattered, overlapping, sometimes contradicting each other. Where a Velthari might have a clear memory with clean edges, a human memory had soft borders and mixed emotions attached to it. "That is interesting," Hayna said slowly. She stood up and started moving around the room, thinking out loud. "Every species has a different way of organizing thought and memory, but they are all very organized in their own way. Even the Zethani network is organized, just in a different pattern than the Velthari. And humans are the exception," Sana added. "Human memories are not organized. They are, what is the word? Chaotic." Teo nodded. He had learned long ago that human memory was unreliable. Humans forgot things easily. They remembered events differently than other people did. They mixed up facts and emotions. It had always seemed like a weakness compared to the perfect recall that many alien species possessed. But what if it was not a weakness? What if it was a strength? "I want to run a test," Teo said. "A dangerous test. I want to expose myself to whatever is making people sick, and I want to be monitored the whole time." Hayna looked at him like he was crazy. "Absolutely not. You could die, or worse, you could end up like all of them, locked in your own mind forever." "But we need to understand the disease," Teo said. "And if we are going to find a cure, we need to see how different brains react to it. I am the only human we have who can do this, and if my theory is right, my brain might be immune. My memories are too messy for this thing to lock onto." Haina wanted to argue more, but she could see the determination in Teo's face. They both knew that they were running out of time. The death toll was climbing. Species were preparing to leave the station. Soon there would be no station at all, just empty corridors and dead bodies. That night, Teo entered a sealed chamber. Haina and Sana sat outside at a control panel, monitoring his vital signs and his brain activity. Scientists from different species watched through glass windows. Everyone was afraid that Teo would become sick, that they would lose one of their only hope they had. The sickness was introduced carefully through a machine that spread it directly to his brain. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then Teo felt something. It was not pain, but it was not pleasant either. It was like something was trying to grab his thoughts and hold them still. It was like his memories were being pulled toward something, some kind of center point that was trying to collect them all and organize them. But the memories would not stay organized. They kept slipping away, mixing together, changing shape. His memory of his mother's face would mix with a memory of his first day on the station. His memory of learning to walk would suddenly become his memory of a conversation with a friend. The sickness was trying to create order, but human memories were too slippery, too fluid, too changeable. After 10 minutes, the test was stopped. Teo opened his eyes and looked out at the people watching him. He was alive. He was awake. He was himself. Over the next 3 days, they performed the test 6 more times. Each time, The sickness tried to infect Teo. Each time, his messy human brain rejected it. It was like trying to organize water. The water would always flow around the organization, always escape the pattern that was trying to be imposed on it. The news spread quickly. Humans were immune. Something about human consciousness made them resistant to the plague. Scientists wanted to study Tayo. Military leaders wanted to understand if humans could be weaponized. Politicians wanted to know what this meant for humanity's place in the galaxy. Hana brought in more data. She studied the brains of all the healthy people on the station. Then she studied the brains of the sick beings from all the different species. The pattern was clear. The sickness worked by taking the organized structure of each species' memory and locking it in place. A Velthari's hierarchical memory became a prison. A Zethani's shared consciousness became a maze they could not escape. A crystalline being's quantum-stored information became a closed loop that could not be broken. But a human's scattered, messy, emotional, changeable memories could not be locked. There was no solid structure to lock. There were only flowing thoughts and shifting feelings. You are not immune because your brain is stronger, Hana explained to Teo one evening. They were sitting together in the laboratory, looking at data that now filled every screen. You are immune because your brain is weaker. Your memories do not hold their shape. They change. They slip away. They mix together. The sickness cannot maintain its grip on something that refuses to stay still. Teo understood what she was saying. For the first time in his life, his greatest weakness as a human was his greatest strength. The unreliability that had always frustrated him, the emotional confusion that had always troubled him, the messy contradictions that made him human. These things had saved his life. But there was still one problem. Understanding why he was immune did not tell them how to save the hundreds of beings who were locked in their memories. And outside the station, in the halls and chambers of the Galactic Council, powerful beings were beginning to ask questions about what humans really were and whether they should be allowed to continue existing. The investigation had answered one mystery, but it had opened the door to much darker questions. Jiwoo discovered the truth by accident. She was in the diplomatic archives, searching through old messages and communications between the council members. She had been asked by her superiors to find any information about similar illnesses that might have happened before. Something to help the scientists understand what they were facing. But as she searched through the old files, something caught her eye. A message between two council members, marked with a high security level. She should not have been able to see it, but a security error had left it visible. The message was from almost 100 years ago. It spoke of a project called Equilibrium Control. It spoke of ways to manage dangerous species before they became too powerful. It spoke of something called memory restructuring technology. Jiwoo's hands shook as she read. She copied the file to her personal device and then quickly closed everything, hoping no one would notice what she had found. She needed to tell Teo. She needed to tell him now. She found her brother in the laboratory late that night. He was still running tests, still trying to understand how to save the infected beings. When she showed him what she had found, his face went very pale. "We need to go deeper," Jiwoo said. "This is not an accident, brother. This was planned. Someone created this sickness deliberately." Over the next 2 days, they searched. Jiwoo used her diplomatic access to find more files. Teo used his scientific credentials to access historical research records. Piece by piece, they discovered the truth. There was an organization called the Architects. They were not part of any single species. They were an ancient group that had existed for millions of years, overseeing the development of other civilizations. The Architects had a philosophy. They believed in balance and order. They believed that no species should become too powerful, too different, or too disruptive to the established order of the galaxy. And they had tools, terrible tools, One of those tools was the technology to create memory-based weapons. Weapons that could lock a mind in place. Weapons that could destroy consciousness without destroying the body. And there was another file. A recent file. A decision by the architects to use this weapon against humanity. The reason was shocking. Humans were unpredictable. Humans were too young to be trusted, but they were growing too fast. They were becoming influential in the council. They had unique qualities that made them valuable, but also dangerous. Qualities that could not be controlled. And most importantly, humans had something that no other species had. They had chaos in their consciousness. They had irrationality. They had emotions that made no logical sense. The architects had decided that humanity was a threat, and they had created the plague not to kill humans, but to use as a test to see if any humans would be immune, a test to see if there was something special about human consciousness. And if there was, they would then erase that knowledge and erase all the humans who possessed it. The plague was not supposed to be this messy. It was not supposed to spread this fast across the station. The architects had made a mistake. They had underestimated how quickly the weapon would spread, and they had underestimated humanity's resistance. The error had turned the weapon into something much larger and more out of control than they intended. But the architects were patient. They had already sent a message, and they would be coming to fix their mistake. Teo brought Jiwoo's discovery to the emergency council meeting. The leaders of the different species listened in shock and anger. They had suspected sabotage, but they had not imagined that it came from the architects themselves, the ancient beings that they had trusted for so long, the beings that had helped guide the development of their civilizations. But not everyone believed the revelation. Some of the older council members had connections to the architects. Some had grown comfortable with the idea of being guided and controlled. Some even agreed with the architects that humanity was a problem. The Velthari representative, a being named Tral, who had been leading his species for 300 years, stood up in anger. If this is true, then our entire civilization has been built on lies. We have lived our entire existence thinking we were free, but we were only free because they allowed it. This is betrayal. The Zathani leader agreed. And this human, Tayo, he is immune. Is this not suspicious? How do we know he is not working with the architects? How do we know the whole human species is not part of this plan? Teo felt fear rise in his chest. He understood the suspicion. If you suddenly learn that your greatest trusted guides have betrayed you, then trust itself becomes impossible. And he was human. He was the one who was immune. Maybe he was part of it. Maybe he could not be trusted. But then Sana spoke. The young Zathani psychologist stood up in the council chamber, and her telepathic voice reached the minds of everyone there. I have studied this being, Teo, for many days, she said. I have reached into his mind. I have felt his emotions and his thoughts. He did not know about the architect's plan. He is as shocked and betrayed as we are. His immunity is not a choice. It is not a weapon. It is simply how human consciousness works. They are not special because they are stronger. They are different because they are weaker in ways that the architects never imagined could be a strength. Haina added more information. She had been working with a team to understand the science of human immunity. She presented data showing that every human on the station would be immune to this plague, not because they were part of the architect's plan, but because human consciousness naturally rejected the ordered prison that the plague created. Humans could not be locked in perfect memory because human memory was never perfect. Humans forgot. Humans lied to themselves. Humans changed their minds. Humans were, in essence, broken in exactly the way that made them unbreakable by this weapon. The council accepted this explanation, though not everyone was happy about it. Plans were made. Teo would work with the scientists from all the different species to develop a cure for the infected beings, and humanity would be watched very carefully. to make sure they did not become a threat themselves. Jiwoo found Teo after the meeting. They stood together, looking out at the station, at all the beings who were still sick, still locked away in their own memories. "They are going to come for you," Jiwoo said quietly. "The architects. They will not let this fail." Teo nodded. He had already realized this. The revelation of the architects' existence would not stop them. It would only make them move faster. And they would not be willing to let a cure be developed. They could not allow the infected beings to wake up and tell their stories. They could not allow humanity to continue existing with the knowledge that something special flowed through human veins. Teo looked at his sister. "Then we better work fast." The cure was dangerous. There was no way around it. To save the infected beings, the scientists had to rewrite their memories at the most basic level. They had to take the perfect, locked memory structures and break them, crack them open, and make them chaotic. They had to make them more like human memory, less organized, less reliable, more emotional and changeable. It was like asking someone to give up the very thing that made them who they were. Teo and Haina worked for 3 days and nights without stopping. They built the cure from Teo's own neural patterns, taking the specific qualities of human consciousness that made him immune and translating that into something that could be given to other species. It was not a medicine. It was not something that would stay in the body. It was more like a therapy, a restructuring program that would be introduced directly into the brain. The other scientists brought concerns and doubts. A Velthari researcher named Kaz pointed out that the cure would destroy the hierarchical memory that his species depended on. "We will lose our history," he said. "We will forget who we are." "No," Sana explained gently. "You will not forget. You will remember differently. Your memories will become more like stories than records. They will be shaped by emotion and perspective rather than pure fact. You will still be yourselves. You will just be yourselves in a new way." But no one knew if this was true. No one knew what would happen when they used the cure on the first patient. They could die. They could lose their minds completely. They could wake up as something that was no longer themselves. Yet there was no choice. The infected beings were dying anyway. The plague was slowly destroying them, even as their minds remained locked. Bodies began to fail. Organs stopped working. Soon even the bodies would be gone, leaving only empty shells with minds trapped inside. The first patient was the Velthari scientist Kree. She was still barely alive, her body sustained only by machines. Teo had known her for years. He had watched her brilliant mind slip away into the memory prison. Now he held the cure that might bring her back, or might destroy what remained of her. "We are ready," Haina said. She and Teo stood next to Kree's medical bed, preparing the machines that would deliver the cure directly to her brain. The procedure took 6 hours. The cure was introduced slowly, carefully, as the machines monitored every change in Kree's neural activity. At first, nothing happened. Then the patterns on the screens began to shift. The locked, organized, perfect memories started to break apart. The beautiful hierarchy of the Velthari consciousness began to crack and scatter. For a moment, there was chaos. Complete, violent chaos in Kree's brain. The scientists watching thought they had killed her. Haina's hands shook as she prepared emergency procedures. But then, slowly, a new pattern began to form. Not the old pattern. Not the ordered hierarchy. Something different. Something that looked more like the human patterns that Teo had shown them. Something messy and emotional and alive. Kree gasped, her eyes moved, her body twitched, and then, slowly, she opened her eyes. She looked around at the scientists watching her. She did not recognize any of them. Her memories were broken, scattered. She did not know who she was or how she had come to be there. But she was awake. She was alive. She was herself. just in a different way than she had been before. "It worked," Teo whispered. "It actually worked." Over the next week, they gave the cure to every infected being on the station. 347 beings received the treatment. Each one was terrifying. Each one could have gone wrong. But for most of them, the cure worked. They woke up. They did not remember everything. They did not have the perfect recall they had before. But they were alive. They were thinking. They were themselves. 73 beings did not survive the treatment. Their brains were too damaged, their minds too far gone into the memory prison. When the cure tried to restructure them, they simply could not hold together. They died peacefully in their sleep, freed from the torture of being locked inside their own minds. The species grieved. Memorials were held. Families and friends tried to understand what had been lost. But there was something else, too. Something unexpected. The beings who survived the cure were different. Yes, they had lost the perfect memory structures of their kinds. But they had gained something else. They had gained the ability to forgive themselves. They had gained the ability to reinterpret their painful memories. They had gained the flexibility to adapt and change in ways they never could before. The Velthari, who had always been perfectly organized, discovered that a little chaos could actually be creative. Cree, when she had finally recovered enough to speak clearly, told Teo something strange. "My memories are now more like stories than facts," she said, "and I understand for the first time that stories can have different meanings depending on who tells them and when they are told. This is a strange gift, but it is a gift." The Zathani, who had always been connected in their shared consciousness, discovered that they could now have individual thoughts that did not have to be understood by the whole. Some of them found this lonely, but others found it liberating. Even the crystalline Orenthians, whose quantum memory had been nearly destroyed by the cure, discovered that they could now change their fundamental structures in ways they never could before. They were less stable, but also more flexible. But not all species accepted their new nature. Some of the older leaders saw the changes as a loss of identity. They wanted to force the recovered beings to try to regain their old structures. They wanted to go back to how things were before. That was when the architects' ships arrived. The first warning came from the scanning stations at the edge of the system. Massive vessels, older than any technology the galaxy had ever seen, were moving toward the station at incredible speed. The architects had heard about what humanity had done. They had heard about the cure that was breaking down the perfect mental structures of the galaxy's species, and they were coming to stop it. The council emergency chambers filled with panic and fear. Species leaders shouted at each other, demanding answers, demanding protection, demanding to know what would happen next. Some wanted to run, some wanted to fight, some wanted to surrender and hope the architects would forgive them. Teo stood with Jiwoo and Hai-Na, watching the screens that showed the approaching architect ships. They were beautiful, he thought, terrible and beautiful, shaped from materials and technology that seemed to defy the laws of physics that all the other races understood. "They are here to finish what they started," Hai-Na said quietly. "No," Teo said. Something was happening in his mind, a realization, a strange thought that came from the very chaos that made him human. "They are here because they are afraid. They are afraid of what happens when a species discovers that it does not need to be controlled. They are afraid of chaos. They are afraid of us." And for the first time, Teo wondered what would happen if, instead of being victims or subjects, humanity stood as equals with all the other species. Not stronger, not better, but different. And different, he was beginning to understand, might be the most powerful thing of all. The architect ships moved into position around the station with terrible grace. They did not fire weapons. They did not attack. Instead, They broadcast a message in a language that all the species could understand. The message was simple and absolute. Humanity must be contained. All research on human neurology must be destroyed. All humans must be placed in isolation. If these demands are not met within 1 hour, we will reset this sector. All species, all technology, all civilizations will be erased. The reset. The threat that had always hung over the galaxy like a dark cloud. The architects had the power to erase entire civilizations as though they had never existed. Some beings said it was like a button that could undo history itself. No one knew exactly what would happen, but everyone knew that it would be the end of everything. The council chambers descended into chaos. Species leaders argued frantically about what to do. Some demanded that humanity be surrendered immediately. Others said they would defend the humans, but their voices were weak with fear. The Zathani leader spoke of honor and solidarity, but even she looked terrified. Teo stood with his sister and watched the arguing. He felt strange inside. He should have been afraid. He knew that he was probably about to be arrested or executed. But instead, he felt something else. He felt calm. He felt clear. "We need to communicate with them," he said to Ji-woo. "They do not want to communicate," Ji-woo replied. "They have made their demands. If we do not comply, they will destroy everything." "No," Teo said. He moved toward the communication station. Hei-na followed him, moving to block the path of the security officers who tried to stop him. "They are afraid, and afraid people do not think clearly. We need to help them understand what they are really afraid of." Before anyone could stop him, Teo opened a channel to the architect fleet. He could not see them directly, only the images of their ships on the screens. But he began to speak, and his words carried across the space between worlds. "I am Teo, a human scientist," he said. "I know you want me and my people destroyed, but before you do that, I want to tell you why that will not work. You are afraid of chaos. You are afraid of species that cannot be controlled. You have spent millions of years trying to create order in the galaxy. But you have discovered something that terrifies you. You discovered that order can be broken by something as simple as a messy, emotional, irrational mind." There was silence. The architects did not respond, but Teo kept talking. He felt the words coming from deep inside him, from the part of him that was most human, the part that was willing to say things even if they made no logical sense. "But here is the truth that you have never understood," Teo continued. "Chaos is not an enemy. It is a teacher. We humans, we mess things up. We forget. We contradict ourselves. We make mistakes. And because of this, we learn. We grow. We change. We become stronger not because we achieve perfection, but because we survive imperfection. And now, every species in this galaxy has tasted what we taste. They are beginning to understand that maybe being a little broken is not weakness. Maybe it is the only way to be truly strong." At that moment, something unexpected happened. The Velthari, who had been treated with the cure, began to speak. Cree, her mind still new and strange, her memories still scattered and emotional, stood in the council chamber with tears flowing from her eyes. Through a communications channel, she addressed the architects directly. "I have lived my entire existence believing that my perfect memory, my organized consciousness, my hierarchical mind was everything that made me valuable," Cree said. "But this human cure has broken that. It has shattered my perfect order, and I would not take it back. Do you understand? I would not undo this. Because now, I can forgive myself for the mistakes I made as a younger being. Now, I can see the value in the chaos. Now, I can understand that perhaps the architects are wrong." Other recovered beings joined her. A Zathani telepath spoke of how wonderful it was to have individual thoughts again, thoughts that belonged only to herself and did not have to be shared with the collective. An Orenthian being spoke of how beautiful it was to be unstable, to be able to change, to not be locked into a single, perfect form. One by one, the species that had been saved by the cure stood together, not in anger, not in defiance, but in something that was perhaps more powerful, in the simple statement that they did not want to go back, that they preferred this new, broken, messy way of being to the perfect order that had been imposed on them. The architect's ships fell silent. The hour that had been given for humanity's surrender passed. But the ships did not fire. They did not activate the reset button. They simply waited. Then a new communication came. It was not from the main architect fleet. It was from a smaller vessel that moved away from the others. A group within the architects called themselves, through the translation systems, the New Architects. The ones who had begun to question the old order. The ones who had started to wonder if perhaps control was not the answer. "We see the value in what has happened here," they said. "We see that life is better when it is allowed to change and adapt. We see that perfection creates stagnation. We have made a decision. We will not erase this sector. And we will no longer support the old methods of control." But the old architects did not accept this. The communication between the two architect factions became tense and angry. The older leaders, the ones who had ruled for millions of years, were not willing to let go of their power. They began to move their ships, ready to destroy the new architects first, and then the station. It was Sana, the Zethani psychologist, who had been so crucial in understanding Teo's immunity, who made the final move. Through her telepathic powers, amplified by the station's technology, she reached into the minds of every species on the station. She showed them what she had learned from Teo's mind. She showed them the pattern of human thought, the pattern of chaos and emotion and irrationality that had saved them all. And in that moment, a new kind of unity formed. Not the forced unity that the architects had created, not the control and manipulation, but a real unity. Species that had learned to think a little like humans. Species that had learned to be a little chaotic and emotional and unpredictable. They all stood together. The architect ships faced a choice. They could destroy the station and everything in it. But they would destroy something they no longer fully understood. They would destroy something that was changing in ways they could not predict. They would destroy chaos itself. And the old architects, for all their power and technology, discovered something that they had not encountered in millions of years. They discovered fear. Not the fear of destruction, but the fear of irrelevance. The fear of not being in control. The fear of facing a future that they could not plan for or manipulate. And in that fear, they hesitated. And in that hesitation, the chance for something new was born.